Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome, and tonight I have my Irish colors on in honor of next week's St. Patrick's Day. I have my green colors on and very much Irish, 100%. But you have to understand the history of my ancestors. Basically, they were settlers from Norway, and we call them the Vikings. That's not what they called themselves. But they basically lived, they were part of the Israelite population that left Egypt with Moses, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, and migrated up into the Caucasian mountains in western Russia and settled throughout northern Europe and eventually into the British Isles and up to what we call Scandinavia. Eventually they moved out and did a lot of trading, did a lot of raiding, let's put it that way, and settled a lot of them in the northern and western bays of Ireland, and that's where I come from. So just to kind of fill in the blanks, and I'm very proud of that heritage. You find a lot of very innovative people that came down from that heritage. Tonight's main science topic, I'm going to be talking about atmospheric electricity. And this brings in a wide range of topics. You're going to really like this. I'm going to be talking about Atlantis, volcanoes. I'm going to be talking about hurricanes and cyclonic storms. I'm going to be talking about all types of topics related to atmospheric electricity. The ancient Egyptian pyramids were very much atmospheric electricity collectors. How about the Nazca Lines? Something I discovered in 2015, that they were actually antennas. It was a large matrix of antennas designed to provide interstellar communications through these are fractal antennas. So anyway, all of this is related to atmospheric electricity, because, for example, the Nazca Lines were powered by atmospheric electricity. Okay, so many aspects to this very interesting topic. But first, I want to make a few announcements. My radio show, which airs on Thursday evenings, a lot of people listen to that. It's from shortwave station WWCR Nashville, Tennessee, is changing to its summertime frequency of 9.350 megahertz. That's heard worldwide in its 25th year, and the precursor to this television show. Okay, and let me see. I want to talk about the Athena lander. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple spacecraft from private companies land on the moon. They actually got that far. One of them was a successful landing, but much to my chagrin, as I talked about last week, they provided no photos. Where are the photos? It would be like you went to a big barbecue with all your friends and you took a picture of a telephone pole. And the photos they sent back do not show the surface of the moon. And that would be one of the primary things that us as just general public would want to see. However, that was I'll name it specifically, the Blue Ghost lander from a company called Firefly Aerospace in Texas. And they had a number of experiments, from what I understand, about 10 experiments from NASA. And one was to sample the ground. And like I said, the surface of the moon has nothing to do with the moon. It's stuff that fell in from the eons previously. And so anyway, the importance of showing the surface of the moon is, what does the surface of the moon really look like? Because have seen pictures where it looks like the middle of a warehouse where they put a fine sprinkling of dust and then have a little rover wheel out and let this, like this perfectly flat living room kind of situation with maybe a 1/4 inch of dust or powder type material on the surface, and that is absolutely not what the lunar surface looks like. And so anyway, I was very interested in waiting for this Athena lander. Now Athena is operated by a company called Intuitive Machines, and this is their second attempt, and it fell the same fate, apparently tipped over upon landing, and therefore the solar panels did not work, and therefore it lost power, it lost battery power, and it was basically a DOA, dead on arrival. However, they did show one photo of the kind of like a leg or some part of the lander and the lunar surface. And the lunar surface in that photo looks exactly like what I would expect. Very uneven, all, just imagine all this debris falling in from outer space, all different sizes, odd shapes, jagged rocks, then covered maybe with a little bit of dust, but completely uneven, not something you would be able to drive a rover around on very easily, or to walk around. So at any rate, here's a photo that they released, and once again, but we don't see the wide scale lunar surface from these photos. Okay, so at any rate, I did a couple of shows recently as a guest talking about these issues where these spacecraft obfuscate the data, especially what does this lunar surface look like? Because it doesn't look like what we've been told, with the nice living room warehouse type of surface with a couple bumps and a couple rocks over there and a nice 1/4 inch layer of dust. No, that couldn't possibly be what the lunar surface looks like. So somebody's jerking your chain. That's the old expression. It's like somebody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Yeah, that's what's going on. Okay. There is I think it's the 18th of March, so that would be in a week next Tuesday. Supposedly there's going to be this giant orange moon, and now I'll explain a little bit about how this happens. The full moon, of course, if it were perfectly in the plane of Earth's orbit with the sun, which we call the ecliptic, there would be a solar and lunar eclipse actually twice a month. There would be the perfect alignment with the sun, where the moon would block out the sun's light, which we call solar eclipse, and then the lunar eclipse is when the Earth gets between the moon and the sun and causes an eclipse on the moon. But because the moon is not in the plane of the planets, it's at an angle. Only rarely does it get to the point during the full moon or the new moon where it is exactly in line with the Earth and the sun, and that would then cause a complete lunar eclipse of the sun, or the solar eclipse where the moon blacks out the sun's light. But what does happen also is sometimes it's there, but it's a little bit off, so it's in what we call the penumbra of the Earth's shadow, which is not quite the entire Earth's shadow. It's not completely blocking out the light to the sun to make the full moon go completely dark for a few minutes, but it gets this reddish hue because the light bends around the Earth, and we get the red part of the spectrum that covers the moon, so it turns red. And now, by the way, the surface of the moon is black. If you were on the moon, it's just about a black color, not a nice gray or anything like that. It's very dark. But overall, it shines enough light back, white light, that we think that the moon is white. It's not white. in reality. But it looks white from our perspective, so it's reflecting the light that gets to it. In this case, when it's in the penumbra, in the only partial shadow of the Earth, it turns red. Okay, and so now this is different than the biblical accounting of the moon turning to blood. That was a very different event, and I'm not going to talk about that now. I'm just talking about this event next week. So there's going to be a lot of hullabaloo over this, and there'll be a lot of YouTube channel wannabes jumping up and down, making all kinds of wild claims. In fact, if we can go back a few decades to the year 2003, there was a wild disinformation campaign that came out of the CIA, and it involved a lady who claimed to talk to aliens. Isn't that cute? And kind of like a bowl haircut made her look pretty crazy. And she was actually an agent pulling this off, pretending to be this lady that talked with aliens and corroborating with NASA. NASA was providing her with photographs behind the scenes and making this whole thing, and of course the whole idea was to make the idea of Planet X just the craziest, most bonkers thing you could imagine, so that nobody would ever talk about it again. And of course that was the entire goal. So you have crazy lady talks to aliens, and on the date of, she kept saying, oh, the date is May 15th, 2003. This started in the mid-90s, mind you. So 8 years earlier, they started this disinformation campaign that on May 15th, 2003, there would be this big orange planet that was going to crash into Earth and we were all going to die. And of course, the idea was that there would be mass suicides. It would be just crazy. All the newspapers would, and it was all due to this misinformation campaign. And they'd go, oh, well, it was just a moon and had nothing to do with Planet X, and look at all these crazy people. And anyway, that was what was going on. And then, of course, the NASA white hats could come riding in, save the day. And I broke it up. I broke this little ring up by calling NASA about a week before this May 15th, 2003 date. And I said, if you don't use the power of the press to stop this insanity and your good name, then you will be responsible for any mass suicides, deaths, etc. And they shut it down. They shut it down because they realized I was correct. So at any rate, this is some insanity that happened, and I want to point it out because it was the same situation where the moon was in the Earth's penumbra. It was a red moon, not a blood red moon, but a red moon, orange moon. And on the cover of these people's books, all of these people predicting the end of Earth, Planet X is going to careen into Earth and everybody's going to die. On the cover of their book would be this big orange ball, trying to depict the idea that Planet X would look like some kind of big orange ball up in the sky, which is not true. If any object in the sky comes into the solar system, it's going to look like a large comet, and that's what they wanted to make sure that nobody knew about that. And that's what I was telling people. I said, if there is such a thing, it's not going to look like a big orange ball because it's going to be an elliptical orbit, and it will look like a comet. And it turns out that the comet Hale-Bopp was in fact the Planet X object discovered by Robert Harrington from the Naval Observatory, and I have a book on this entire topic dealing with that, and it's called The Real History of Planet X, 2020 update, and that's available on my webpage. But back to the orange moon next week. There will certainly be plenty of lunacy over this on the internet, but it's just a normal, almost full moon, but not quite an eclipse, because it's only in the penumbra, the partial part of Earth's shadow. Okay, just a quick summary here. Let me see. It was on the July 30th, August 13th, and 20th shows of this TV show where I talked about the pole shift and mountain building, and that's something that's very important to understand. And the difference between a physical pole shift, which there's actual movement of the crust and mantle of the earth, and a magnetic pole shift. And so I see that there's some yo-yos jumping up and down around on the internet, on talk radio shows and podcasts, claiming that there's going to be a magnetic pole shift. Well, magnetic pole shifts happen all the time, maybe once a month, certainly many times per year. And what it amounts to is the solar wind coming out from the sun carries a magnetic field because it's an electrical current. And sometimes it reverses to the point where it'll actually reverse our magnetic field, which is partially geomagnetic field, but it mainly plasma magnetic field associated with our Earth. And so this happens regularly, where the Earth's magnetic flips and then comes back to normal, and nobody dies, nobody even knows what's going on. But it happens frequently. So the people running around talking about magnetic pole shifts don't know what they're talking about, because it does not cause earthquakes, doesn't cause Earth to physically move or cause the poles to flip, all kinds of misinformation. And once again, the people jumping up and down, running around on podcasts, and sometimes major podcasts. And the problem with the host on most of these podcasts is they're not scientists at all. They don't know anything about science. They have other specialties, totally unrelated. And so they let this pass without ever asking an intelligent question. They don't have real scientists on their show. They have these hacks and wannabes that can come out with all kinds of crazy stories, and you, the listener, are sitting there listening to this as if these people were some kind of authority. So anyway, listen to those shows. Go back and listen. Once again, shows number 5, 6, and 7 of this series, July 30th, August 13th, and August 20th in this series, and then shows number 5, 6, and 7. And okay, and just a comment. There's an old saying that yesterday, this is referring to these like quacks and wannabes. It's yesterday I couldn't spell Unganir, today I are one. And that applies for some of these people. All of a sudden they're specialists in everything under the sun, including space science and comet science and asteroids and everything else under the sun. They're an expert because they read a book someplace. And it's really, that applies. There are so many people running around today giving out just misinformation that it is funny. The reason for this, the reason for all of this misinformation, and the reason you have all these quacks running around spouting things that make no sense at all, the reason is because government science has no integrity. Because you find that people like NASA, the Goddard Space Flight Center, JPL, are propounding theories that don't make any sense, or the Big Bang, and all of this crazy, crazy science that they're trying to pawn off on the public. The public doesn't believe it. It's like, what do you mean the universe just popped out of a pinhead and 14 billion years later we're driving our SUVs up and down the road? And then you have the James Webb Telescope, which comes along and takes pictures of galaxies that are farther away than where the Big Bang should be, which means that they're disproving the Big Bang literally. Yet these clowns keep, these scientists, astrophysicists, keep promoting these lame ideas. And so the public, as a result, doesn't have any confidence in government science, in government health care, in government anything. And that opens the door. That just the barn doors are open for all these clowns to run out and occupy YouTube channels and just feed you with constant, just as we say in Ireland, malarkey. And so anyway, it's just abhorrent. It's pathetic. But that's why, is because supposedly the hallowed halls of science and university and government science agencies is filled with garbage. And the public realizes that and then turns to all these other quacks for information, unfortunately. Okay, let me dive right into the topic tonight of atmospheric electricity. Okay, I'm going to start this out by talking about Tesla technology. So this is Nikola Tesla, late 1800s, early 1900s. Late 1800s, he had, in, 1896, I believe it was, may not have that exactly right, but he had an exhibition at the Chicago Fair, and where they lit the place up with generators, much to the awe of many people. And so this was the introduction to many people for his transmission technology. And of course, Edison was competing with direct current, DC, which didn't work because DC, there's no way to change the voltage as there is with AC. AC is just superior in all aspects. But they were having a lot of fires with DC because it was lower voltage. The same issue they have with solar panels today. The issue with solar panels, if you have not heard, like the Amazon fires, Amazon had 5 or 6 major fires. They decided to go green and put solar panels on the roofs of all of these warehouses, Amazon warehouses. And what happened was the solar panels are low voltage. So you have hundreds, if not thousands, of solar panels. And what happens, because they're low voltage, they are higher current. And so because you have to connect all of these solar panels together, these junctions have developed corrosion, etc. They're not fit perfectly tight, and they start to develop a high impedance, a high resistance, and then the current tries to get through there, it heats them up and starts a fire. And so that's why solar will not work on a wide scale. It might work on your house, something like that, where you got a few panels, 10 or 20 panels maybe. But for large scale investment into power, it's simply not going to work. Additionally, you need batteries because the only time the solar panels work is when the sun is shining. So solar is not a solution. I go through this in my book, McCanney Wing Generator, World Energy Project, and published in 2010, where I predicted the downfall of the alternative energy industry. 3-blade wind turbines and solar panels, I said, are not going to work. Okay, so at any rate, the issue with atmospheric electricity, now back in, this is like maybe at least 20 years ago, I started a project to duplicate Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. And I looked for funding. And as I got farther into the project, I realized that, this is not a good technology for wide-scale use. And back in the day when Tesla, this is the early 1900s, Tesla built the Wardenclyffe Tower, the idea was to garner atmospheric electricity and then distribute it. He was going to distribute it through the ground, not through wires, not through cabling, not through the atmosphere. He was garnering the electricity through the atmosphere, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works because that's instrumental in understanding, for example, the Great Pyramid with the Golden Cap, or Atlantis, the city of Atlantis, the lost continent, or tornadoes or hurricanes or volcanoes that have tremendous amount of electricity, electrical lightning that shoots out the top and bottom of clouds. And a lot of the misunderstanding that's propagated through bad science by supposedly people who know better, physicists. Okay, so getting back to Tesla and the Wardenclyffe Tower, the way it worked is the following. You have, in fact, this is how a Tesla generator works. If you have one in your laboratory, or if you have one in the classroom, they sell these little kid models where you can put them in your classroom and do interesting little experiments. But basically, what a Tesla tower is it's a transformer. You take a DC signal, and this is going back to Atlantis, By the way, my book, Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection, explains this, how they were using DC seawater batteries to charge up the Tesla tower, what we call Tesla towers, to tap into atmospheric electricity in the ancient city of Atlantis, which, by the way, was in the South China Sea. I'll be talking a little bit about that later on in the show, which is a very active atmospheric electrical area. It's so active even today that when NASA flies over it with satellites or whatever, is they basically shut everything down. They don't try and communicate because there's so much atmospheric electricity in the South China Sea. Okay, so back to Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. Now there's a component in electricity which is called a Schmidt trigger. It's a very simple device. You take a DC battery and you take points, basically two wires, one from each terminal of the battery, and you touch them together temporarily, just quickly, like points. Same kind of idea, points on the old cars where you had a point system and a rotor, that type of thing, to create an electrical spark in a gasoline engine. And what happens? Okay, so you get a surge of current. Okay, for a split second you get a surge of current. Now if you put that into a transformer, like a thousands, maybe 100,000 to 1 transformer, what happens is the AC signal, because it's a short burst of electricity, it's like a pulse, which has a very sharp rise and a very sharp drop. And that change in the electrical field in the wires creates a very sharp pulse, and that's what the Tesla transformer converts from a low voltage, relatively low voltage signal into a very high voltage signal. And so that's what, then you have a central core and a pin that sticks up in the air, and that is the receiving the magnetic field from the core, the 100,000 winds on your transformer, etc. And it creates this oscillating electromagnetic field of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of volts. And you can control the frequency by the winding on the transformer and the frequency of closing the Schmidt trigger. And that's what a Tesla tower is. Now the strange thing about Tesla's tower at Wardenclyffe is he didn't build any smaller units. It would be like the Wright brothers building a 747 as their first plane. It's very strange. It's a very strange situation where Tesla built the Wardenclyffe Tower and right out of the chute. And so that tells me, as a scientist, as a physicist, as a person who's been on big projects, that you don't just build the big one right out of the gate. Like I say, it would be like the Wright brothers building a 747 on their first plane. It had to build up in stages to the point where you could build a 747. So how did Tesla build this Wardenclyffe Tower right out of the gate and know all the wire sizes, the dimensions, the frequencies, the number of winds? I mean, he was a smart guy, but that tells me that he had some previous information. Now, when he grew up, his father was the curator in Serbia of the Vatican Library there. And so I think he had access to ancient texts, which showed him some of these technologies. By the way, that church was destroyed. Billy Clinton blew it up, sent a rocket in and blew up that church, and as far as we know, with all the records. Anyway, take that for what it's worth, but that's what happened to the church where Tesla literally grew up. And like I say, his father was the curator of that, and Tesla was a very good student. He was an engineer, a physics student. He was a physics major. And I mean, I can't say conclusively, but it just makes sense that he had access to information. So that would have been ancient information that was garnered in the hallowed halls of the Catholic Church and the libraries, these ancient libraries, that they still keep, by the way. I believe that the fire, for example, the fire at Alexandria never happened. Well, it did. They burned some books, but they didn't burn all the books. They got them out of there first and put them in the Vatican Library before they burnt some books to make a show like they were burning all the books, but they didn't. They kept all that information. And there were many other library burnings over the ages, including the Abbey at Glastonbury, the Joseph of Arimathea Library that we have the Colburn from. And I talk about that, where I was the first person in the United States to have a copy of the Colburn, one of 3 copies that came into the U.S. And after it was published by the good people in Australia, and then of course it was immediately abducted and obfuscated and replaced by a bunch of basically quacks on the internet. So if you look up the Colburn, Kolbrin, do not buy the one that's on Amazon. That's a charlatan misrepresentation of the real Colburn. Get the real Colburn. It's online from the Chaldean Trust in Australia. And so at any rate, in fact, I was just looking the other day at that history of that, where they tried to get Amazon to shut that down, but Amazon kept selling. In fact, Amazon was the only bookshelf, so to speak, bookseller of all of the platforms of booksellers that kept selling that illicit copy of the Colburn by a person who claimed he wrote it. I mean, what a quack. But anyway, just beware. But anyway, the Colburn, get the original Chaldean Trust copy of the Colburn if you're going to read that. But it's, and there's a woman who has some amazing work, Yvonne Whiteman from England, dealing with interpretations of the Colburn. And by the way, the point I was making here is that was one of the libraries that was burned by the Romans, and which by that time were actually being controlled by the Catholic Church, which was growing out of Rome at the time. And a lot of people, historians, realize the Roman Empire didn't fall, it turned into the Catholic Church. Okay, so at any rate, another piece of history there that's important to understand. Okay, so back to Tesla and his Tesla Tower, his Wardenclyffe Tower, and his Colorado Spring experiment where he was dealing with atmospheric electricity. And what he had also in Colorado Springs was a big ball on the top of a tower. And what he would do is gather atmospheric electricity and send it out through the ground. And there's a story about one time Tesla was, he had his project at Colorado Springs going. It was the middle of the night, and he would set lights out in the middle of the desert. And they would be in the direction of the collector, and they'd have just wires going into the ground. So the current would come through the ground, up through the light, and then down. And he was lighting up the entire desert. And one time he got a pulse, an electromagnetic pulse, from the atmosphere, and it blew out an actual electric generator in a local power company, and he had to replace it. He had to pay for this. But the point is that atmospheric electricity is a very powerful source of energy, and the Atlanteans and the ancients and the whoever built the ancient pyramids at Giza, for example, understood atmospheric electricity and were using it. And they understood the principle that Tesla was implementing with the Schmidt trigger, the DC battery, the Schmidt trigger, the coils, and then the capstone, so to speak, on the pyramids was, for example, a collector, atmospheric electricity collector. And in, for example, the Nazca ruins, or the Nazca lines in Peru, I made the major discovery that they were antennas. But the question is, how were they driving these antennas, the fractal antennas? And the answer was that they had mounds there. They were man-made mounds that had atmospheric collectors on top of them out in the middle of the plains of Nazca to drive the signaling of these antennas, this antenna complex. Okay, so now let me further explain how the Tesla Tower at Wardenclyffe worked. And you can see that it's a big dome, and sticking out from the dome are wires, or like It looks like almost like rebar, that type of steel rod sticking out all over. And those were the collectors. And so the idea of the collector then, what he would do is he would use DC power that was converted from the electric grid. He had a contract with Westinghouse, and this was something that, much to the chagrin of Westinghouse and J.P. Morgan, his financier, etc., when they found out what he was doing, that's when they tore down the Tesla Tower. It was in 1917, at the beginning of World War I, when they tore down the Wardenclyffe Tower, with the public premise that it was something they didn't want to fall into the hands of the Germans. But no, they didn't want it to fall into anybody's hands, because Tesla was gathering atmospheric electricity and distributing it for free, competing with the generators, the coal-fired generators that were being used, other Tesla technology, by Westinghouse to sell electricity. And they realized that this Tesla guy was sidestepping them and would have free distribution of electricity, and Tesla was sending the electricity out through the ground. That's how he was distributing the electricity. And because he knew the resonant frequency of the Earth, he knew the frequency to send out the signaling in the ground that would then reach homes and businesses at the lowest impedance for an AC signal. So Tesla was a smart guy. He was doing all this on his own. Okay, so now, how did it gather atmospheric electricity? And this is what I discovered. And also the thing that was major about the work that I did when I was at Cornell in 1979 to 81, in that time frame, I was discovering this. I realized that Tesla didn't know where the electric field came from, the vertical electric field. And it's a DC vertical electric field. It's about 300 volts per meter. It's very high. So you wonder, well, why isn't this discharging all the time? And the answer is that because the atmosphere is a dielectric. It's a very good insulator. And so it blocks the transmission of electricity from the ionosphere, which is the other side of the capacitor, and earth ground. And so the way you tap a hole through that electrically is you use the Tesla coil and you pulse it and what Tesla figured out, it was around 40 hertz. And that's why it would produce a low hum, which people would hear miles away. There's a device in Australia, it's called a didgeridoo. It's a flat piece of board on the end of a string, and you whip it around like a rock on the end of a string, but this didgeridoo, and it produces a low humming sound that carries along the ground. And you can hear this for literally 50 miles away. And it was a way of communication, a method of communication with the Aborigines. It's called the didgeridoo. And you swing it around and change the frequency, etc., to communicate. So at any rate, the same thing happened with the Tesla tower at Wardenclyffe. The people in a distance, they said when he cranked that up, they could see the electricity up in the sky coming down, being collected, and they heard the low frequency, the 40 cycle hum, off in the distance. And of course, all of this is denied today. Now you'll see people saying, oh, he was trying to transmit electricity through the air. Well, where was he supposed to get the electricity to transmit through the air? It's bogus. And it's misinformation to try and obfuscate what Tesla was really doing. Okay, so the 40 cycle frequency, what that does is, because the Tesla coils are switching very high, million of volts positive, million volts negative on a frequency of about 40 hertz, 40 cycles per second. This then, it's like a radio signal, and what it does is it takes the dielectric molecules in the atmosphere and it flips them like this in unison. Well, in the normal air, the dielectric molecules are in all different directions and they're bouncing around because it's air. And so that's part of the dielectric property. But if you could align them in an electric field and a switching electric field where they're all switching in unison, what that does is it creates a channel, an electrical channel where the electrical current can come down from the ionosphere. And so he did that, and he learned how to do that and then captured the electricity and then send it out through the ground. And as I said, he had discovered how to tap into the vertical electric field, and it's not free energy. Do not, I repeat, do not confuse this with the baloney that people are going through on the internet. You put a little box on the table and the energy of the universe flows in and it's free energy. No. In physics, you need to account for energy, called conservation of energy. And Tesla knew that he was tapping into the vertical electric field. However, he did not know where the vertical electric field came from. He didn't know how far up it was. He didn't know the source of it. He didn't understand the physics of the sun-earth connection. And so this is what I discovered when I was researching Tesla's work. And then I realized he didn't have spacecraft data like I did. He didn't have information like I did to go to that next step and understand, where does this vertical electric field come from? What sustains it? Why is it there? But Tesla knew how to use it, which is an amazing feat all in its own. So his Colorado Springs endeavor and the Wardenclyffe Tower were both to garner electricity from the atmosphere and then transmit it through the ground at a resonant frequency that he knew was in the ground. Okay, so now let's go back to Atlantis. Let's start there. It's one of the earliest known places where we would know about atmospheric electricity. And the Atlanteans knew about atmospheric electricity. Atlantis, the mother city, now they had colonies all over the world. Atlantis was a major worldwide empire. Egypt was a section of their worldwide empire. And the world at the time was very different. The poles of the world were different. The North Pole of the world at the time was in Hudson's Bay, north of the state of Michigan in Ontario. And the South Pole was near an island down in the South Indian Ocean called McDonald's Island. That's where the North and South Pole used to be in the days of Atlantis. That changed during the Venus event, when Venus came by as a large comet and caused a pole shift, a physical pole shift, and changed the poles by about 30 degrees, estimate 30 degrees to where they are now. And that's why, by the way, the great floods, when the ice cap melted very quickly, what we call the Laurentian ice cap, it did not extend down into Siberia. And the reason it didn't is because the Earth had a very different North Pole. Greenland remained, what we call Greenland today, remained in the region of the polar ice cap. But what I'm saying is that in the days of Atlantis, what we call the North Pole, which is a floating ice cap, there's no land there like at the South Pole, that was open water. So that was the passage that was used by the mariners. Also, the shoreline of what we call Antarctica now was open water. And so that's why the Phoenician mariners had the map that eventually got up and translated into the Peri-Reis map, showing the coastline of Antarctica, which was only rediscovered by satellites using satellite imagery, radar imagery that could go through the ice and determine the coastline of South America, which matches identically with the Peri-Reis map that Columbus had. Where did Columbus get the map? He got it from ancient mariners, and these seafarers, that was one of their prized possessions, were the maps. And so there's a lot of misinformation today about that, but the reason the Phoenicians had the coastline was because their history went back to Atlantis. Okay, and now just quickly also, there's many people jumping up and down on the internet today claiming that Atlantis was in all kinds of places, like in the Atlantic Ocean, etc. But the crux of the issue is that there are many, many aspects to the legend of Atlantis. One of the biggest ones is regarding the Pillars of Hercules. Now, there's people that claim it's the Eye of the Sahara in northwestern Africa. That is not correct at all. It doesn't match. That's an electrical discharge where Earth received an electrical discharge from a passing comet, possibly the Venus event. And then also the people talk about it being out in the Azores or in the Atlantic Ocean or the mid-Atlantic Ridge. None of those places qualify for the simple reason that they don't have anything that qualifies for the Pillars of Hercules. The South China Sea does. The Pillars of Hercules were the volcanoes, Krakatoa and its sister volcano, on both sides of the Strait of Sunda between Sumatra, off of the coastline of Sumatra. And so that was the opening gate, and the mariners could see these columns far out to sea, hundreds of miles away. And the other situation is that these columns of smoke that came up into the air, the actual Pillars of Hercules, were constantly discharging the vertical electric field, so it lit them up like a giant neon light bulb in the middle of the night. And so they could see these, or even in the daytime. All they had to do, the Phoenician mariners and traders, all they had to do was get within a couple 100 miles, and there's the columns of Hercules, and that led them into the channel which led up to the South China Sea. And the other reason I know about this is because I verified this because the U.S. Navy submarine fleet out of northern Australia was excavating the continent of Atlantis, doing archaeological excavations in the South China Sea in the late 1990s. And the reason I know about that is because I had access to their webpage, which was going in great detail of what they were finding. So any information that people have, or people running around saying this was Atlantis or that was Atlantis, Atlantis was in the South China Sea, and it was a slewing event where it just sank overnight, which we've seen. For example, there are many places on planet Earth where we see these slewing events. The Canary Islands happens to be one of them, and where you see slewing events, but the Canary Islands, the whole, are very small. The Atlantean continent, the five-ring city, and the related continent wasn't just the five-ring city. It was a fairly large continental shelf, sank into the ocean, and that's why today the South China Sea is very shallow. And they also talk about the bogs, the grass bogs that were in the ocean there surrounding Atlantis. So there was a cut through that where the mariners would go, and if they were not friendly, Atlantis had reflectors and basically mirrors set up that would burn them right out of the ocean. So that's why no enemies could approach Atlantis, because they had the atmospheric electricity and they had these reflectors, which, in those days everything was cloth, sail, and ships, wooden ships. And so you could just focus this on those, in a couple of seconds they were burned up. And so nobody got into that area without permission. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So now what I want to do is go through a number of naturally occurring things like tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes, etc., and talk about atmospheric electricity. Now, I just want to preface this discussion with, I have a book, my most recent book. It's called The Real History of Man and Earth, Myths, Magic, and Mayhem. It's on Amazon. It's also on my webpage. But I discuss in there the really ego pumping that's going on with a lot of people, and they're trying to pick dates of when things happened, and some people are trying to tell that everything that happened, Earth catastrophes, was during some period called the Younger Dryas. And just stop doing this, because what they're doing is they're saying, first of all, that standard archaeology is wrong about their dating, which is clearly true, but then they come in with this totally bogus a series of new dates which don't make any sense at all, and they're really damaging the process of discovery, because we don't have enough information. Literally, we do not have enough information. These people are just wild speculation and trying to put this together and that together, and solar positions, and just, it's goofiness to the nth degree. So my message is, stop putting dates on things. And if you're a talk show host, especially one of the bigger ones, stop letting people put this goofy information on your radio show. You're not helping anybody. You're just confusing the situation. Really, these people have no very, very thin, wild speculation reasons for putting dates on things. And literally, we don't have enough information. For example, the Great Pyramids are very old, or the Sphinx, where they're talking about it's eroded. Well, there happened to have been a great flood, a worldwide torrential rain flood for 40 days and 40 nights. I've talked about that on this show. And so it wouldn't be surprising that the Sphinx exhibits erosion, extensive erosion, and what they're assuming is that it had been desert conditions back 10,000 years. Well, that's simply false. It's simply false. Anyway, I'm not going to go into this in more detail, but we have a lot of misinformation coming out of people who are just there for driving their egos, and it's really damaging. It's very damaging to real progress in understanding the history of man and Earth. Okay, so I want to talk about, for example, the Egyptian pyramids. We don't know who built these or when they were built, but they were certainly built a long time ago, and they may have been built in phases. For example, the Mayans rebuilt their pyramids every 54 years based on the periodicity, the two major damaging passages of the comet Venus. That is very clear from the Popol Vuh. And so that's why this, for example, the main pyramid at Chichen Itza is off by 13.5 degrees. In the mid-1990s, I went there on the ground myself, surveying equipment with an assistant, and we surveyed the whole area at Chichen Itza and Uxmal and Tulum, and then used the cross-referencing of these locations to determine that the Old North Pole was in the Hudson Bay, which agrees with the work of quite a number of other people, including Mark Gaffney, a friend of mine who wrote a book dealing with pole shifts. And very definitely within the last 5,000 years, Earth experienced a major pole shift. And that's why these people running around assuming that Earth has always been on its current trajectory, orbit, rotational period, and everything else, the precession, etc. All of that was different more than 6,000 years ago. So you can't, or the people claiming that the Mayan calendar can go back thousands and thousands of years. No, Earth experienced a pole shift, so none of those things are correct. And it's very clear that Earth experienced a major pole shift of about 30 degrees. So that threw off our orbit, the rotational period, everything. And so, but anyway, the Great Pyramids are an enigma, a real enigma as to who had built them. But we know that the Great Pyramids had a golden cap called the Keystone. And what was the purpose of that? Just to have a pretty top on the pyramid? No, the purpose was atmospheric electricity collection. And the idea this pawned off on us that the pyramids were somehow tombs of pharaohs, absolutely absurd. But we don't know who built the pyramids or when. These might be 100,000 years old. We don't know. And there again, stop putting dates on things because we don't know. And there again, the Sphinx. We don't know who built that, nor when. And it could have been there. We just simply don't know. So stop putting dates and trying to put dates on this because it's just confusing the whole situation. People are using very, very, very poor reasoning to try and put dates on some of these objects. And the same with the Mexican pyramids. We know for a fact that the Mayan The Mayans rebuilt their pyramids and layered them, like Uxmal, Chichen Itza, etc. So these were not the original pyramids that were there a long time ago. And in fact, they were built on the old grid work. So what happened is there was a pole shift. They rebuilt, and they built on the old grid system, not realizing that the calendar had completely changed. And this is what Velikovsky is all about. Velikovsky wasn't studying astronomy or comets. He was studying ancient calendars, one of the greatest scholars. And that's something, too, that the clowns running around the internet today don't understand what Velikovsky did, who he was, what he was really working on. And what he discovered is that the calendars had changed, which meant that Earth's orbit had changed drastically. And within the last 5,000 years, he puts a date on it. I think it's a very good date, but it may be off by a little bit. We don't know, because he's also associating it with the calendar of the pharaohs. But back to the pyramid, the Great Pyramid at Giza had its golden cap. And the reason for that was atmospheric electric collection of atmospheric electricity. And maybe there's probably hundreds of pyramids around Egypt also, which could have been used for the same thing. We see things that potentially could have been used by the pre-Incas. So we have the Olmecs, the cultures which predated the Mayans. We have the Toltecs, which predated the Aztecs. We don't know anything about them. And there again, who were these? Were they people? We assume they were, but there's not really a trace of who they were or where they came from. Then we have migrations. How about, for example, a very interesting one is the Polynesian migrations across the Pacific Ocean, where they literally left from southwest Pacific regions and migrated in canoes. Well, why would you do that? They were expecting to find Lemuria, which was the lost continent, and what they found were the South Pacific Islands, including Hawaii. And so the Earth was a very different place, and the legends that go back are very clear. We have people in Africa who claim that they had come from Mars, and they escaped Mars before it lost its ocean and atmosphere. And you have the clowns at NASA today saying that, oh, the oceans on Mars were billions of years ago. No, they were recent. And there's all kinds of surface detail that tells you that the oceans and atmosphere on Mars were very recent, that it lost it, and it lost it due to the passage of the large comet Venus, which literally sucked the atmosphere and oceans off of Mars. And the ancients saw it. They talk about it. That's what Velikovsky was very clear discussing it. Okay, so now we have volcanoes, tornadoes, hurricanes, we have Atlantis, we have Tesla coming along in modern times using atmospheric electricity knowledge technologies to extract energy from the atmosphere. And by the way, my project where I was going to duplicate Tesla technology, the Wardenclyffe Tower, what I realized is it's a very dangerous technology because due to solar flares, due to the propensity for solar flares to hit Earth and then come down the column of electricity to the Tesla Tower, and then you're distributing this out to the public. It might work on a small scale, but it's something you simply have a very difficult time controlling. And so it's not a technology that's really meant for wide-scale public use, garnering atmospheric electricity and then putting it through the ground and distributing it through the ground. Very dangerous technology, not to mention it's going to kill a lot of birds. Anything that flies is going to be killed. So a very dangerous technology. So the five-ring city at Atlantis had Poseidon, a big statue of Poseidon in the center with his basically pitchfork going, a multi-pronged metal device going upwards into the atmosphere. And I have it based on my own research, that they were using that also to ride that column of the magnetic field into outer space. It was a way of launching electromagnetic propulsion systems, one of my other specialties, into space, and then for landing also, for dropping down and landing on Earth. So quite a spectacle to see Atlantis at night with the column of electricity going up into the ionosphere, and then look like a airport in a modern day scenario, but with the craft going up and down. Anyway, I'm running out of time here, so I hope this was interesting, and it's a topic that I'll be covering more of in the future, atmospheric electricity.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.